Alright, I apologize right in advance. This is probably going to be longer than I have any intention of making it, but I got a lot more questions than I really thought I would for this whole Q&A thing. I'm sorry. Every question I got, though, I wrote down over here. I've got them written right here, and I'm going to be going down the list. This is in no real order. This is just in the order of which I got them in my inbox. And so I also got all the requests. I have another list over there, segregate of all the requests. I'm going to try to go through as many of those games as I possibly can and review them. No promises on some of them. Some of them I don't own. Some of them are just time consuming. Like Xenoblade Chronicles, for example, that one's going to have to wait because it's such a huge and long game. Some of these games I don't own and don't really have the money to spend on right now. So, I'll do the best I can, and I will try to get through these. But let's go ahead and get to the questions over here. Do you think Mass Effect 3 was ruined in order to make way for Mass Effect 4? Yes, I do. I think it is extremely likely. In fact, it's so likely it's to the point where I don't even think that should really be a question. It, from a, and I almost understand this, from a corporate perspective, from the perspective of a manager, from the perspective of a marketer, from the perspective of someone who is trying to make money out of their job of making video games, the idea of ending a franchise is just, what? Why? Why would you do that? We could keep selling it. If nothing else, we could go back and go do it. And the more creative control the company, the corporate side, has of it than as over the developers, the writers, the directors, all the people actually involved with it, the more you're going to see that. All I have to say to that, is Halo 4, and anyone who's familiar with that circumstance will know exactly what I'm talking about immediately. Yeah, Halo 3 will be the last. Yeah, no. So, yes, of course, I think that one of the biggest reasons why Mass Effect 3 was changed was to pave the way for a Mass Effect 4 or whatever they decide to do next. That's almost guaranteed at this point. Next game. Have I ever next question. Have I ever considered playing games and recording it? Yes, I have. I actually did one video like that. I never actually uploaded it. It was for Third Birthday, which is a Parasite Eve game, and I say that kind of jokingly because it was a terrible game compared to Parasite Eve 1 and 2, but anyways, let's not talk about that. And I had some gameplay sections, and I had me talking about it, and blah, 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 just like you see any other reviewer do. And I showed that to my friends here. Back then, 50 views on one of my videos was considered high, and I, basically just did it for my friends, and my real-life friends, and my sister and my family. And every single one of them said, "This is terrible. This is just like every other review I've ever seen. I'd much rather see you. I'd rather see your expressions, your emotions, your eyes, blah, blah." In fact, my sister used to complain that the reason I keep the lights on at max in here, which I don't normally do, because I can't see my screen very well with all the reflection, is so that I can be visible, so you can see me, so you can see what I'm doing here, so you can see my expressions, so you can see my eyes. And it just kind of evolved from there into this is kind of what I do now. This is kind of my thing, the talking head, I believe it's been referred to as. So, what next question? What is my opinion on the Call of Dutyization of most modern video games? Now, this is an interesting topic. I've often said that all things are acceptable in moderation. And let me make my statement absolutely clear. Call of Duty 4, Modern Warfare 1, was a brilliant game. That's one of those very few games that deserves the art category, and I'll explain the art thing in a minute, but I'll just explain it now. To me, when I call a video game art, when I call a book or a movie or music, anything like that art, that is to me one of the highest accolades I can give something. I'm not talking about the literal definition of art, Take my Sonic cup here, right? There we go. Say, if I carve my initial there, which you can't really see, but I just did that, with my fingernail. I could defend that this is art, and there are people who will defend this for me, saying this is art. That's what we call the technically. I've always been against the idea of technically. Technically, excuse me. Technically is something that in my opinion, if you have to bring out a technically to make the point, you've already lost. Real art is something that really evokes something within you. It really brings out or engages within you an emotion, a thought, a process of just, oh my god, yeah, whatever it may be. It may be good, it may be horrible, it may be something. Not horrible as in, bad as in, but I mean, grief. Grief is an emotion that a true piece of art can evoke within someone, and that's not a bad thing, if you follow me. So, Modern Warfare 1 was a work of art. Now, let me just make that absolutely clear. So I see these other people, and this is not exactly the first time this has been done, too. It's kind of funny. I'll get into that in a moment. But all these game developers, all these companies, all these marketing staff saw the numbers, and they saw that, oh my God, Modern Warfare is selling like the moon was just turned into candy or something. I don't know. And so everyone was trying to copy the iron sight aiming, the cover-based combat, and the regenerating health thing. And Gears of War is also partially to blame for that, if you could use the word blame in such a thing. Now the problem here is this results in a lot of carbon copy clones that are terrible. This is why I say all things in moderation. There have been some games that have aped this concept and have done it properly, and there are a lot of games that haven't. This isn't a new thing, though. I don't know how many of you in my audience remember Doom, when we called everything a Doom clone, when we called everything a Command and Conquer clone. You remember that? I remember that one especially because I used to be more into RTS games than most other types on the PC. Than any other types on the PC, actually. And so I played Command and Conquer and Warcraft 1 a lot. And there were so many Command and Conquer clones. I couldn't even possibly name them all. They were so terrible. They were so just carbon. It's like everyone just saw the basic principles of the game mechanics and said, that is why that game is selling. Let us copy it left and right, and missed all the part that actually made the game great. And this is exactly what's happened with the Call of Dutyization of gaming, is because people see the Call of Duties and say, that mechanic, those things, that is what makes gaming great. Cover-based combat is the key. Realistic gaming. And we have to be clear, it is not realistic gaming. It's believable gaming. There's a difference. Believable gaming, that's the key. No. I think it's unnecessary, I think it's excess, but I think it's nothing new, and this is just going to keep happening. We're going to see another, amazing game come out anytime soon here. Possibly has already happened, and then everyone's going to be like, yes, that, I can't think of something right off the top of my head. Barbie's Mall Adventure, yes, that is the best game ever! I got nothing. Next question. This is actually like a five-parter here. I would like to hear about where you work, and my experience with programming and what you do. Now, ironically, I don't do any programming here, which is, I say that's ironic because that's what I went to college for. I originally did plan to be a game developer until I found out how it works in the real world. And for any of you who's not aware, I strongly recommend you do not become a game developer unless you either have the funding to do it or are going the indie route, because, with either the Kickstarter thing or something on Steam, because it's a very soul-sucking process. I'm just going to outline this real quick. I'm trying to be quick with all these questions, but let's just say Bam! I've got a great idea for a game. I want it to be about sluices. A game about sluices. Okay. Just bear with me. And, I really feel about this game. I could name several settings that I would love to turn into a game. The Elementi just comes immediately to mind. I just finished writing up that setting several months ago. And I would love to make that into a video. I died. Oh, God, yes, please. And so I go out, and the ideal is you go out and you make the game, and you pour your heart out and you pour your soul, and you work late nights. Oh, yes, I'm going to get this done. It's going to be awesome. And you test it, and it's great. And it's, yes, it's great. The reality is you get a job at a company, and then you work that job for several years until it gets to the point where you can finally have the clout and experience and general shoot, I can't think of the word I'm thinking of. Having been there long enough in order to say, well, I have an idea for a game. And then they say, all right, present it before the committee. All right, that's a great idea for a game. We're going to change this, this, and this. Here's your budget. Here's your deadline. Go. Oh, and by the way, you have to use this, and it has to be on this console. And that's the reality of it. That's the reality of making games these days, and it has been for quite some time, let's be honest with ourselves. The days of sitting in your shed and making a video game hasn't been true since the early 90s, late 80s, and before. So, I just kind of pulled out of that completely, started getting into graphics design, and more or less accidentally landed this job. I'm going to go ahead and tell the story if you don't mind. It's very quick. I was playing WoW. This is vanilla. This is like 6.5 years ago now. I was playing. Oh no, it's 6 years ago. I'm sorry, 6 years ago. Is playing WoW, and we're just sitting there in Ashenvale Forest. I still remember. And I was going through doing the quest. I was leveling my warrior. I was a night elf, and my friend Gary, who still works here as it happens, shows up and says, "Hey, they need someone to cover for tonight at the place I work, and they can't get anyone, and they need someone tonight." As in a shift that starts in 2 hours. Can you work that? And I was like, yes, God, yes, please. Because at the time, I was actually jobless. I was having some issues with that, which I'm not going to get into. And so I ended up walking in And they were like, "All right, what do you know?" And I just blew them out of the water because I actually do know a great deal about computers, hardware, networking, that sort of thing, just because of everyday real life experience. And this has always been a topic that has fascinated me. And so I got the job like that, and I've worked here ever since. So that's what I do. I make sure I'm the only one working here overnight. I make sure this place keeps up and running. We maintain servers. This is a data center essentially, but we also do ITMS, if you know what that is, and a lot of My Apps Anywhere work and that kind of thing. And it's my job overnight to make sure everything works. Anyone who calls in, that's my job. Any customers that come in wanting access to the rack, that's my job. Anything that's wrong at all is my job. A lot of maintenance is stuff I do, that kind of thing. It's very difficult to explain to people. I get the question all the time because I wear my shirt here with my little icon on it, and they're like, "Oh, what do you do?" And that's like, how do you explain that to someone who does not know? I maintain the internet. No, it doesn't work that way. You can't just say that because that's not true. And they're saying, "Oh, you keep our websites up?" Well, no, I keep the thing that keeps your websites up. Huh? So I've gotten used to just saying I'm a network engineer and leaving it at that. I'm sorry, I have to worry a little bit. Next question. Do I write, make story ideas, or story plot lines, etc.? Yes, yes, and yes. As I guess I just mentioned, I make settings. I write whole settings and the history and the regions, the cultural setups. Several specific individuals, that kind of thing. I do that a lot, actually. I've been doing that for many, many, many years. About a decade and a half at this point, I suppose. And I tend to remember them. I tend to do write-ups, which is what I call it when I actually put it down to paper or print it out or whatever. And I do that often. I'm often asked by people who are either working on games or making up a story. Maybe they want to write a short story, maybe they want to write a whole book. Someone who's starting a D&D campaign or a Cyberpunk campaign or a GURPS campaign or whatever. They come to me and they say, "Hey, I want a setting custom made," and I say, "Well, okay, I do that all the time, and I do it for fun too. I enjoy doing that, always have. What are some of my favorite movies and games? I'll cover favorite games later because that was asked far more specifically later on in this questions. Favorite movies? This is going to sound horrible because I actually like a very broad spectrum of movies, and I have a very large movie archive, let's just put it that way. So if I actually had to sit down and list it, it would take a while. But favorites, ones I could watch, right now without any question and hesitations, things I really want to see. The Star Wars original trilogy, bam, done. I could watch that anytime. The Lord of the Rings trilogy, bam, done. Yes, it was different from the books. No, I don't care. They were still fantastically done movies. Several others. Let's see, what else we got on that list? See, the problem is I'm almost hesitant to say past that because I just know anything else I say people are going to pick apart. "Oh, well, you like that? Oh, what the heck?" Maybe I'm just going to stop there. Let's just go ahead and stop there. I mean, there are other movies I like, quite a few, but I'm going to list those two as my favorites because I could watch those movies at any time without hesitation or question. Speaking of questions, next question: pepperoni or cheese? Now that's silly. I would obviously go for both pepperoni and cheese, and preferably some green bell peppers and mushrooms and onions as well, because I'm kind of a vegetable freak, always have been. There was this place called Round Table, which there isn't around here. There's no Round Table pizza around here. I used to go and get, like, the veggie pizza of doom. It was about this tall. It was very nice. I kind of missed that. But anyways, I'm dragging on here. Pardon me just a moment. Sorry. As someone has mentioned somewhere along the line, I do this at work, so every now and again I just have to kind of tab over and see, like, what the heck, and make sure that's working properly, which it is. Next question. What would I like to see in Dragon Age 3? Now, I've thought about this question overnight. I'm going to try really hard not to ramble on this one, so I'm just going to summarize this as succinctly as I can. Dragon Age 3 should have the best parts of Dragon Age 1 and Dragon Age 2, and yes, there were good parts of Dragon Age 2 in my opinion. The way they streamlined the combat and the interface and the way the gameplay, the mechanics of the game were not a bad idea ultimately. I would prefer the animation to be more Dragon Age 1 because Dragon Age 2 was simply too Hollywood for me. No, what I really miss is in Dragon Age 1 where you've got a two-hander and you do this thing in order to do a single swing. It did a massive amount of damage, as a two-hander should, and it was much more believable. But everything other than that, everything other than animations I would take from Dragon Age 2, and all the story, the character development, especially the character development. Dragon Age 1 and Mass Effect 2 are two of the very few games, but Final Fantasy 6 and Chrono Trigger would also be on this list, and a couple others, of games that the entire party, every single major character, playable character that you encountered was someone I actually genuinely cared about. Most games have the one or two characters where it's just like, you either don't care about them or you actively dislike them. A perfect example of that would be Final Fantasy 13 and Hope. And anyone who knows what I know, what I'm talking about, knows instantly what I'm saying. Or FF12 and Vaughn, while we're on the subject. But anyways, point being, all the characters in Dragon Age 1, every single one of them, I was right there with them. I cared about them. I actually wanted them. I hate to. I don't know how to put this. I wanted my character, the Warden, to be friends with them. I wanted them. I wanted to have their respect. I wanted to have their honor. I wanted to honor them. I wanted to help them with their lives. The whole. Shoot, I can't think of his name. The dwarf. All of a sudden, I can't think of his name. The rampaging little dwarf guy. I'm gonna have to ask my friend about that. I really wanted to help him resolve his situation with his lost love and the woman and make that work out for him and get him back on his life. Next question. Sorry, let's move on here. But I'm sorry, I haven't quite finished. The final thing I would really like to see in Dragon Age 3, and I apologize because this is going to sound a little mean, is what I wanted in Mass Effect 3. Oghren! That was his name. Oghren, sorry. Oghren. I really wanted Oghren's story to work out. I wanted to. And it was true for all of them. Zevran, and Wynn. Anyways, okay. I really wanted Mass Effect 3 to really not just acknowledge the choices I made in Mass Effect 1 and 2, but to really have those impact the storyline, and it didn't, and I'm not going to go into that. But what I really want, and it probably won't in in Dragon Age 3, let's be honest with ourselves, the developers have already gone on record as saying, for example, that the Elysium choice with Morrigan in the Witch Hunt DLC, even though that is something that is tracked in the file, is not something they're really going to think is important enough to really have an impact in Dragon Age 3. And that's disappointing to me. I always thought that left on a massive cliffhanger from Doom. And I really wanted, one of the reasons I was really getting into Dragon Age 2 was I really wanted to find out what happened. And they never covered it. And now they tell me they're probably never going to cover it. But in my ideal world, I would like Dragon Age 3 to really evolve based on Dragon Age 1 and Dragon Age 2. Exactly like I wanted Mass Effect 3 too. But anyways, moving on. Next question. What is my opinion on high-definition remakes? I've said before that one of the worst things you can do, with an exception, which I'll go into in a minute, is port a game. A port is the bottom of the list. You've got port, high-def remake, polish remake, which is a little bit above high. Those two are kind of blend together, and then a proper actual remake of the game. And I'm totally okay with this. Always have been. As long as you do a good job of it. Final Fantasy IV for the DS, Chrono Trigger for the DS, Final Fantasy Origins back on the PS1, all that was magnificent, completely with it. Down here in the port thing, to use the same example, Chrono Trigger or Final Fantasy IV on the PlayStation 1, those were terrible, and they were clearly very poorly done, too. A high-def remake is something that, fundamentally, I can at least see why they're doing it, but ultimately, I personally will not be buying. If you understand me, I'm more or less ambivalent to the idea. If you're making a high-def remake of a game I care about, I own that game. I already have it. I have no desire to plop it on my PS3 and see it in slightly shinier graphics. I don't. I'm sorry. I don't care. If you are going to actually polish the game, fine, I'll consider buying it. If you're going to, and this is the exception I mentioned, if you're going to port it or do a high-def remake onto a portable system like PSP or the 3DS or whatever, then I will probably buy that, as long as it's low in price. If FF7 came out on the PSP, this is actually technically true, it did come out on the PSP, for something less than $10, then I would say, yes, done, man, oh, goodness. Because, that way I have it available wherever I go. I don't have to go digging out and get the monitor hooked up and switch cords and all that. I can just pull out my PSP, shkong, play FF7. So, I'm with them on why they do the high-def remake. I just personally have no particular reason for doing that, and I don't know, it feels cheap. I hate to say this because this is almost being petty, but it feels like such a cheap way to wring money out of something rather than to, celebrate the series. Like the Kingdom Hearts HD remake that's coming out, or I guess has already come out, I'm not actually sure on that. The original Kingdom Hearts, they were going to do a high-def remake of it, and Final Fantasy X as well, I believe. And it's like, okay, are you going to do anything with it? That's my first question, because Kingdom Hearts had some problems with it. FF10 had some problems with it. They have this chance to go back and say, well, let's polish it a bit. Like Chrono Trigger did on the DS. Chrono Trigger was not fundamentally changed when it went to the DS, but they polished the hell out of it. It looked fantastic. The game engine was retooled and recoded in order to make it, smoother and easier and less loading times. It was just well done from bottom to top. So if they did that, that'd be great. But a pure high-def port, which is just graphics, go! No, I don't get into that. That's not my thing. Sorry. Let's see. Next question is, what do I think... Okay, this is going to be a long one. I've thought about this question a bit. What do you think about the lack of sex in video games, especially when contrasted with all the violence? Now... okay. L- Let me go on the record right here by saying I'm kind of a boring individual. And I guess technically I'm not. My friends argue that I am not. But I am not someone who is into like woo girls and all that. You know, I've never been that mentality. I've never been able to get into that kind of humor or that kind of anything. Yeah, it's not my thing. That's not to say I'm not into girls, but I've never been, I guess, frat boyish. I'm not sure what term I'm looking for. That's a bit too severe. So my point I'm getting to is that sex in a video game is something I would rather not have. If that makes any sense, I personally would rather it just not be there. It could be implied. That's fine because it makes perfect sense. But I don't want it. I don't want to. You know, I hate to call this out, but I don't want the explicit things of The Witcher 1. Now, granted, all they did was have the card come up, but you get my idea. In my opinion, that was right towing it over the line. That was just 1 inch too far. And there are money games that go much further than that, we're not going to talk about. That's my opinion. That's what I prefer. Now, given that fact, I personally think there should actually be more sex in video games. And let me try and explain myself here for a moment. How do I put this? Fallout 3 is an excellent example. In Fallout 3, there are two hookers in Fallout 3. Prostitutes, whatever you want to call them. They sell sex. I'm not going to be... You know, it's nothing to be ashamed of in a setting like that, if you'll forgive me for being blunt. It's just something that is. And yet, if you hire one of them in Megaton, all she does is walk up to the room, lays down on the bed, and you have just effectively rented a room for that. Nothing happens, nothing shows, nothing happens at all, right? Now, me personally, I'm fine with that. You know, if I really cared, I could use my imagination. But my point is, it's very strange in a game, Fallout 3, that you can literally blow someone's eyeballs out with a punch, if you feel like it, that they won't show anything. They will show midriff at the worst. You know, that's it. That seems very odd to me. It's gotten worse over the years, that whole double standard about violence and sex in video games, and anything actually, but especially in video games. You know, you want a video game where you just bloodily massacre an entire village. That's not going to get a particularly high rating. You have a video game where a single nude woman is shown at the certain point in the game, and that literally will jack the rating up significantly more by itself. It seems like such an odd thing, and if I had my actual way, if I was just given the powers of the queue and said, you know, let's fix this, what I would do is make it optional. Because a lot of games have optional violence as well. One of my favorite examples of that is Team Fortress 2. A game that, if you really get down to it, is horrifically, massively bloody and violent, but if you turn on... You can, if you choose, turn on settings to make that be, you know, dollar bills flying out, or steak chops, or whatever, you know. Just random stuff, and it just stops being gory and bloody and violent, and starts becoming hilarious. And yes, I do play in the mode, in case you're curious. So... I'm with that. I like the fact that it's optional. If I wanted the bloody gore, it's there, and if I don't, it's there. I like that. So why can't we do that sort of thing with sex in video games? Why can't we have it so it's... You know, let me give you another example here. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. Anyone remember the cup of coffee mod and that whole thing? They're... in a game where you can commit atrocities of a level that I can't even go into. You know, and just in an almost cartoony fashion. What upset everyone was the fact that you could sort of see some extremely poorly rendered, poorly designed, poorly animated sex scenes that weren't even supposed to be visible unless you used the game or hacked the game in a very specific fashion. What? That was what you got upset about? Not the fact that I could take a car down to downtown and just start driving on the sidewalk and running over people and sending them flying into telephone poles? No. You got upset because something that wasn't actually intended to be seen was able to be seen under one circumstances, and it had to do with sex. No, I'm sorry if I sound like I'm ranting on this. I just think the double standard really is completely unnecessary. And if I had my way, I would make it optional. I would make sex optional, and I would make gore optional. And I'm sorry, I have to actually add something here. I do mean gore, not violence. It is very possible for something to be very violent that has that has little to no gore. I will use an example of that. The Lord of the Rings movies are incredibly violent, and yet how gory are they? Really? Barely any at all. You know, almost non-existent. Yes, a head gets chopped off here and there, but it's not overdone. It's not horror movie style splatterhouse thing. It's just and it's gone. It's nice and clean. In fact, it doesn't even work that way, as anyone should be able to tell. And I'm fine with that because that's very violent without being gory. You know. So, anyways, moving along. That's my thought on that. I apologize about going into detail, but I think this should be optional. Next question, and I'm going to quote this. Where the hell do you record your videos? Exclamation point. I think you said it was at work, but why at work? Well, this is going to sound weird. The only time I have any real free, unbudgeted time is at work. Anytime I'm at home, I'm either spending time with my friends, spending time with my family, spending time with my loved one, or playing video games. When I'm at work, I have periods of time like now. I've got some maintenance going on in the background now. I'm updating Windows on several servers. I'm updating a data safe box, making sure some backups go reviewed. I have work going on in the background of my laptop as I'm doing this here. So this is the only time I actually have any time to do these videos. More or less. It's kind of ironic because, I'm an adult in a modern age. My time is just sucked up by everything. Not that I'm complaining. I do enjoy hanging out with my friends and playing my video games, but this is the only time I have to do it. That's why. So, next question. What are my favorite genres and why? This is an interesting question. In no real order, Western RPGs, Japanese RPGs, real-time strategy, war, general strategy, and 4X games. If you don't know what 4X games, Civilization is a 4X. It means explore, expand, something, and conquer. I actually don't remember what it means, but it's a Civilization style, Alpha Centauri style, uh, Spore style in the very last stage, something like that. Those are my favorite genres. As far as why, Western RPGs I tend to enjoy. Let's use the Elder Scrolls series as the pinnacle example of Western RPG. I love the freedom. I love the personification of Avatar, if that makes any sense. In a Western RPG, you play an avatar. You aren't playing Cloud, for example. You're playing whatever you decided to name yourself and whatever you decided to design yourself as. And there's a degree more of exploration, of openness in a Western RPG, which I really get into. I love the sandboxing, I always have. It's one of the reasons the Elder Scrolls series sucked me in at such an early age, all the way back at Daggerfall. Japanese RPGs, by contrast, tend to be much more cloistered, but the good ones tend to have the best stories. Final Fantasy VI, Chrono Trigger, Breath of Fire 2, Lufia 2, all sorts of Japanese RPGs. Earthbound, all of these had really excellent stories, really excellent plots and development of characters, and really made me care about the interactions thereof. And so, I really get into that. I really enjoy the interactive story medium at that point. RTS and strategy, it's harder to explain. I've always been a bit of a how do I put this? I'm a bit of a history buff, but I'm especially a bit of a war history buff. War. Let me be absolutely clear. War is one of those things that it is difficult to overemphasize just exactly how absolutely horrible it is on a personal level. But when you take war and you look at it from a gaming perspective, from the perspective of a board game, if you're playing, even down to the point of playing chess or a video game or something like that, what you do is you remove the horror element. As weird as that sounds, you holodeckize it, as I like to call it. You romanticize the concept, so you take care, you plick out all the horribleness of it, and all you have left is the tactics, the strategy involved, and I really get into that, always have. I tend to have a very tactical, operational, and strategic mindset, and so I enjoy doing that, and that's actually a very similar reason why 4X games tend to be my thing. I love building an empire. I love setting up a civilization and conquering lands and colonizing and all that sort of thing. I don't know how to explain it properly. I've always gotten into that, but anyways, I'm going to stop talking about this now. Moving on. Next question. This is a good one. When did you start playing games? How has it affected your life, both good and bad? Bad. I need some water. When did I start playing games? That's a good question. The earliest I remember is when I was 2. And I'm not kidding when I say that. I was playing one of those, you don't even see these anymore, the flat arcade things, and you'd sit down, and there was this tiny little control thing right under here, and it was just flat table, and it's usually like a pizza joint or something like that. And you'd play, Centipede or Pac-Man or whatever. That's the earliest I remember playing video games, was sitting on my dad's lap at a I have no idea what it is. I can picture it. It was in San Diego. I'm from California, by the way. It was in San Diego, and we were just sitting there playing Pac-Man, and I've been playing video games basically ever since. I remember the first time he borrowed his friend's NES and brought over Super Mario Brothers, the original, and we played that all the way into the wee hours of the night. It was fantastic. I loved it. And I've been playing video games basically ever since. I don't know how to say this without sounding incredibly geeky, but since I am incredibly geeky, I suppose I'll just go out and say it. Video games have been an important part of my life. They're one of the four big things in my life, and it's probably fourth on that list, but still one of the four big things in my life. One of the things that I really find joy and happiness in. And I guess this is me answering the second one. How has it affected my life? Video games are an excellent outlet for me. They always have been. It's a wonderful way to engage in something because I don't have ADD or ADHD, but it's very difficult for me to. It's just my mind is always going, and so I prefer to do multiple things at once. Or at the very least, I prefer to do things. It's very difficult for me to sit down and read a book and just read a book because it feels so non-interactive. When I'm playing a video game, I may still, like a Japanese RPG, just to use an example, I'm still enjoying a magnificent story, but I'm actually doing something in order to do something other than turn the page. If you follow me, and so I really get into that, and I really do enjoy that, and blah blah blah. I guess I'll go on to the next question. Excuse me. Next question. Do you think some games are dumbed down for certain audiences? Example: very few old-school RPGs. If so, when is it valid to criticize this? One game does not affect every other game out there. That's very good. That's actually absolutely true. Yes, I do absolutely think some games are dumbed down for certain audiences. Now here's the catch. And this is the ineffable thing. This is the hard to quantify thing, the intangible. I think it is completely acceptable to dumb down or make harder if the end result is good, and that's a hard thing to quantify. That's a hard thing to say. What makes it good? Let me give you an example of something where something was not dumbed down. Donkey Kong Country Returns on the Wii, good game. I recommend it, by the way. Was not dumbed down from the original Donkey Kong. It was still hard. It was still brutal. It was still right there on the level of difficulty of the original, and that was awesome. I loved it because it pulled it off well. And my friend and I, who were playing Gary, and we were co-oping the whole dang gang. We were just going through it, and we were loving it. We'd be dying, like, we died again, dang it. And we wouldn't be getting frustrated or irritated because the difficulty is what we expected. But by contrast, you take some of the more modern games and you see them dumbing them down. Let's see. Let me use an example here. Modern Warfare 3, when compared to Modern Warfare 1. Now, Modern Warfare 3 is a shadow of Modern Warfare 1 and 2. Let me make that absolutely clear. It is not as good, period, the end, no, really. But it was still a good game. It was still an enjoyable game. They just completely screwed up the multiplayer. But it was still a good game, right? For the single-player aspect. And they really did dumb it down. It was much, much easier than 1 or 2 were. And that still worked out well because the idea was not so much the difficulty as getting through it properly, and you could still enjoy the experience. And if you really wanted to, you could crank it up another notch, except you were already at the top notch, but whatever, you get the idea. The point was, I don't think dumbing down by itself is necessarily a bad thing. It's when you do it to excess, or when you do it to the point of insulting the player, that it gets ridiculous. And I have seen games do that, and I really hate myself for saying this, but Zelda Skyward Sword is a game that dumbed down in a bad way. The difficulty of the game stems solely from the interface, from the Wiimote, and how you have to use that in order to play it. And I'll do a review on that game later in more depth. But that isn't. But other than that, I really don't need to be reminded every single time I pick up a bug that this is this bug, and you just got it, and it goes there. And I really don't need to be informed constantly by Fee. Hey, your hearts are low, just letting you know. I really can't imagine. Navi, back in Ocarina of Time, never really bothered me. Fee, or Fire, whatever the heck her name is, in Skyward Sword, bugs the crud out of me. So I think it depends on how they pull it off. I think it depends on exactly, for what purpose they do it and to what extent they do it. And is it valid to criticize? Only if it actually negatively impacts the gameplay. If you come out with an RPG that is a joke, then, yeah, okay, at that point we're just getting insulted, aren't we? But if you come out with an RPG and it's easier than, say, a previous one was, but it's still a good game, It really does depend on the circumstance. I'm sorry for the kind of non-answer here, but let's move on. God, I'm only halfway through my list here. My stance on violence. That's ironic. I was actually just asked that question. See back about 10 minutes for my answer to that. Oh, there is an addendum. How do I see sex and violence in games in 5 years from now? Personally, I think what we're going to see is either one of two things. We're either going to see more and more people are going to try and vying for more sex in video games, and so we're going to see more of the pseudo-nude shots. Like Mass Effect 3, I had a romance scene with Liara, which was very, very, very close to nude. And that was fine. It was artistically done. I wasn't into it, but it was done in a proper enough fashion that it didn't bother me. If you follow me, it wasn't done to be like whoa. It was just done to show that these two characters care about each other, and I like that. That pushing the envelope just a little bit is probably going to keep getting more and more pushed until it gets to the point where sex is completely common in video games to the point of excess, or the double standard I talked about earlier is actually going to get worse, and it's going to get to the point where that kind of thing either requires an even higher rating or is socially considered unacceptable to have in a video game, and instead we're just going to go the violence route. So that's what I think. Pardon me. Next question. This is this question I spent the most time on. I actually spent some time debating with Pax on this one. I'll explain why in a moment. What are your top 5 favorite games, top 5 least favorite games, and top 5 most disappointing games? Now, the reason this took me so long was because figuring out my top 5 least favorite games was actually a challenge for me, because all of them were basically from the old era. Back from the NESs and the SNESs and that sort of thing. Because in the modern, now that now that I'm an adult, for the past 15, 20 years that I've been an adult, I have had to pay for games myself. I've had to make this happen myself. That's money that comes out of my budget that I have to manage. I'm relatively fiscally responsible. I learned that from my mother, but the catch is I have to justify every single expense, and so buying bad games is just something I don't do anymore because, yeah, and game rentals has just kind of dropped off, and demos don't really count. So bottom line is I haven't really played a bad game in quite a while. I've steered clear of games that look bad, but I can't really comment on them personally if you follow me. But anyways, let me get to this. The top 5 favorite. Now I apologize because this is more like my top 15 favorite. The only two I can speak of absolutely is Final Fantasy VI, right up there in the top, and Chrono Trigger right underneath it. Those two are, without question and hesitation, my favorite games of all time. Still, I keep kind of waiting for some game to crawl its way up there, but so far nothing has. After that, we've got a huge list. Final Fantasy IV, Secret of Mana, Lufia 2, Earthbound, Oblivion, Mega Man X1, Super Metroid, Symphony of the Night, Castlevania, Super Mario Bros. 3, Mega Man 2, Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep, God of War 2, Asheron's Call, Warcraft 3, Civilization 2, StarCraft 2, Alpha Centauri, Portal 1, Modern Warfare 1, Modern Warfare 2, Diablo 2. I'm going to stop there. It's a fairly large list. All of these games, though, are ones that I would consider absolutely fantastic. And yes, I'm sorry, I'm just going to go ahead and add them because they are on the list right there. Dragon Age and, Dragon Age Origins and Mass Effect 2 are both on that list. Absolutely fantastic games, every single one of them. I love all of them. Top 5 dislikes. Here's the one I really had to think about. Barbie. It's on the NES. Feel free to go look it up. I've actually never played further than 5 minutes into it. I've never successfully done so. I've tried. And because I was doing it as a joke for a friend of mine and I failed. I couldn't do it. It was terrible. I have to add Lester the Unlikely on that, which most people have never even heard of. It's a SNES action platformer, which is terrible. By accident, I was renting Secret of Mana, one of my favorite games of all time, and inside the box was Lester the Unlikely instead of Secret of Mana. And I was sick at the time, and my mother was at work. This was actually quite a while ago. And so I was left with Lester the Unlikely and nothing else to do. That was a terrible game. Not just because of the fact that I was restricted to it, but it was an awful game. Anyways, Postal 2. I've never played Postal 1, but Postal 2 was gutter trash. I cannot speak. I refuse to give it any more of my airtime other than to say it was human garbage. Moving on. E.T., the extraterrestrial, that was on the Atari. I have to give points to that one for being the game that almost single-handedly ruined video gaming as a concept. And EA, I think, is definitely my least favorite video game of all of them. Is that? Can I do that? Can I just say EA in general? No? I should, dang it. I should be able to say Electronic Arts is garbage. Anyways, moving on. And my top 5 disappointments. Fable, right at the top of my list, because I don't know how many of you remember, but Fable was being touted as the Morrowind killer, and I'd been an Elder Scrolls fan since forever, and I loved Morrowind. Oh god, I was so into Morrowind. I was actively playing Morrowind still when they were doing Fable, and it was like, oh my god, Fable is coming out, the Morrowind killer. Yes, every choice matters, and I'm sorry, none of the choices matter, and nothing changes, and there's a very linear world, and for a long time, I hated Fable. I've gone back and played it since and realized it isn't actually a bad game in its own right. It really isn't. It's just a game. But, God, it was disappointing. Next one, Civilization 3. You may have heard me say Civilization 2 in my previous list of favorites of all time. I played Civ 2 constantly. I played the holy hell out of that game. And I was really excited about Civ 3, and it just completely failed to live up to my expectations. Star Wars Galaxies. I'm a big Star Wars fan. Not a huge, I'm not an actual Star Wars geek. See my Star Trek shirt here. No, but in all honesty, I get into Star Wars, but not to the universal extent. I'm not a fanboy. You still have to be good. You can't just be Star Wars. But I was really excited about the concept of an MMO about Star Wars. This was back when the MMO boom was happening. And I've talked about that before. Star Wars go, yes, it's going to be great. It's going to be the worst MMO I've ever played in my life. I should put that on my least favorites. The point being, Star Wars Galaxies was just a huge disappointment. I was wanting so much out of it, and it gave me nothing at all. And let's see, I have to mention Duke Nukem Forever because it's just kind of required by Geek Law. But let's be completely honest, I was never into Duke Nukem. The only Duke Nukem I ever really liked was the side scroller, which most people probably don't even remember. And I was not actually disappointed by it. I was completely expecting Duke Nukem Forever to be garbage, and it was. The end. Moving on. And last one on my top 5 disappointments is Mass Effect 3. Now, I should technically add that to the list because the ending really did hit me sufficiently hard. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it on that list, but I'm not trying to be mean. It's just true. Alright, next question. What do you think about BioWare and their continuing reduction of dialogue options in their games? And the gentleman goes on to talk about how he's been playing Mass Effect 1, and he makes a valid point. In Mass Effect 1 and in Mass Effect 2, you got tons of dialogue options. They happened constantly, and it was usually just there for flavor. But flavor is very important to a game. Flavor, to continue the food analogy, nutrients are fine, but I need flavor to actually enjoy my meal, if you follow me. And so flavor was fantastic, and you constantly had the dialogue wheel in Mass Effect 1. In Mass Effect 3, I noticed this all the way back in the demo when I'm playing Mass Effect 3. There were very few, whole scenes would play, and I'm just sitting there like, and my actual thought was they took out the dialogue wheel for separate options in the demo, because they'd be in the normal game. They didn't, as we know, and Mass Effect 3 just had less, and I think that's terrible. I think that what they're trying to do is, well, if you'll forgive me for being blunt, is lazy, because the less dialogue options you have, the less recording you have to do, the less lines you have to write, the less directing you have to do, because there is a degree of directing to all those cutscenes. You still have to say, okay, this face moves here, and this goes here, and the camera shifts over here. Less work involved overall with less dialogue options, and no, that's terrible, it's awful. I really wish they'd go back to that. Dragon Age 1, I said I was going to talk about this later, and this would be the time. Dragon Age 1, this is something I almost kind of would like to see in Dragon Age 3, is the return to the old style. Dragon Age 1 was the most recent game that did that, unless KOTOR was... No, I think KOTOR was first. So Dragon Age would be the most recent game that did that, where your character doesn't have a voice actor. Now, don't get me wrong, I was blown away in Mass Effect 1 when your character had a voice actor, because that was, it was revolutionary at the time. And using, rough approximation of what your answers are, and then having your person actually say, blah, 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 was certainly an interesting way of getting around that problem, and they did it by always referring to you as Shepard. Always referring to you by your last name, and they could do that because, military and all that. And they did that in Dragon Age 2 and so forth and so on. That's becoming the new thing, but every now and again I just kind of wish I could go back to the old system, because not only does that give you a lot more choice in the matter. I mean, how many times in Tor or in Mass Effect 3 is probably the worst example of that. Dragon Age 2 also had this problem. You'd pick this option, which you think, I want to, comfort you, and instead you'd be like, just suck it up, you'll live with it. And it would not be what you wanted to say, and you're just, no, that's not what I meant, take it back, whatever. I much prefer actually having the option of saying, have the dialogue option that says, I will do A, B, and C, and then the dialogue option comes out, I will do A, B, and C. Whether you're voice acted or not, the other person can then react directly to that. And so I think I personally would kind of like to go back to that for Dragon Age, or at the very least, and this is also possible, They could have voice acting for all of those options. I don't know why they've never done this. You could have all of it written out rather than the dialogue wheel. You could still have the bar thing like all the other games all the way back into Baldur's Gate have done, and actually have written out the whole sentence. Pick that sentence, and then your voice actor says that sentence rather than something that's an approximation of that sentence. So whatever. I'm rambling a bit. I apologize. What are my thoughts on the decline of Squaresoft slash Enix, or Enix, I'm sorry. Expected, to be honest with you. I really did not want it to happen, but I'd say ever since the merger, they've been declining in quality, but I don't want to blame the merger directly. But it is very clearly becoming, I will defend Final Fantasy XIII as being a decent game. Do I think it's better than, any other Final Fantasy game? No, I do not. I think every other Final Fantasy game that has come before that, including 10-2, was better. And I could go into the detail on that. I'm not going to here, obviously. I'm already at 40 minutes. Good lord. But the point is that I think that the decline of the company is something that's frankly grievous. If Squaresoft used to be one of those names where if you saw a Squaresoft game of any kind that came out, you were like, yes, I buy it now. When does it come out? Tomorrow. I'll be there. I'll be at the store. And nowadays, it's more like a Square Enix game has come out. All right, well, let's watch some videos and let's see the gameplay. This is okay. I'll get it on sale later. Or maybe it's actually good and maybe I'll actually buy it. But you get the point. I'm very grieved. Is that a word? By the decline of Squaresoft. And let's be honest, Squaresoft might as well not even exist at this point for how few people still work there that were in the original Squaresoft. Umatsu left, and Hironobu left, and several other people I don't really feel like trying to mispronounce their names right now, because I'm not that good with Japanese names, but you get the idea. So it's kind of a shame. Do I play pen and paper or tabletop? Yes, I do, constantly. I actually have four games that I'm either running or about to be running right now. All of these, actually all but one of them are D&D, one of them was Cyberpunk. I get into Warhammer, I get into Battletech, I get into D20, I get into GURPS. I haven't actually played GURPS in many, many years, so like 7 or 8 years now at this point. But I do that rather frequently, and I also used to LARP. I don't do that anymore, and I guess I could explain really briefly why. LARPing and tabletop both are something that only really work if the people you're playing with are on the same wavelength with you. If you're super geeks and you're trying to completely stay in character all the time, that will work. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to say that like it's a bad thing. I've done this before myself. If you just stay in character all the time, this is out of character, in character, out of character, and you just stay on the level and play it seriously, that can actually be quite fun. That can be quite enjoyable. Or if you're just goofing off and doing your own thing and constantly being out of character and having fun, that can also work. But everyone has to be on the same wavelength, or else people just aren't going to enjoy it. If you follow me here. So yes, I do run. Also, I GM. I don't, or whatever you want to call it, Dungeon Master. I don't really play tabletop much at all. I'm usually the GM because that's just kind of the way I am. I'm much better at GMing than I am at playing. I wouldn't even know how to play if you tossed it back at me right now. I could think about it and get back into the swing of it, but I much prefer to be the GM, and several people enjoy my games, and as I've said, I just kind of make settings up, and I've got several games that are ready to go here, or about to be going, that are all based on settings I designed, 4 of them, like I said, settings that I designed, so, I do that rather. What do I do for a living? I guess I already covered that question. I'm an idiot. I duplicated a question here. I make cookies in the back there. Alright, next question. Well, what do you want to tell us about yourself? Okay. I've often said I'm very boring to other people, but all of my friends disagree with me on this, so let me just lay this out. I don't drink, I don't gamble, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs, I don't sleep around. And that's why they call me very boring. Not really much of a party person. I'm not antisocial. I do enjoy hanging out with my friends. I do enjoy hanging out with people sometimes, within moderation, as with all things. But as far as my interests, I could list it for another half hour, just going on listing my interests. Basically, you name it, other than the things I just outlawed there, and I am into it to some degree or another. I watch Formula One with my friend. I go play tennis with my other friend. I do D&D, like I said. I do video games. I make music. I play on the piano. What else we got? I enjoy theater. I enjoy history. Blah 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 blah. I could keep going. The list goes on and on. So I'm into a lot of different things, and as a result, I tend to get along with quite a few people. because I can relate to them, even if it's only in a small degree. So there's that. That's about me. Am I going to play and review Assassin's Creed 3? Yes. No possible deadline yet. I still actually need to buy Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. A friend of mine who is more into the series than I am played it and said it was disappointing, and so he advised me to get it used. So I'll be getting it used. And I'll probably be doing the same with Assassin's Creed 3. What are my favorite novels? This is going to sound horrible, but let's go ahead and just toss the Harry Potters on the top of that list, preferably from book 3 and on, but whatever. A very large chunk of the Star Wars extended universe, not all of it, not all of it. There are quite a few bad Star Wars books, don't get me wrong, especially some of the newer stuff. I really much prefer the... I can't even think of it. There's a period which is like Return of the Jedi up to the Hand of Thrawn duology. All that, with like 3 exceptions, was good, and then they kind of branched out some more, and it started to get more crap in there. But anyways, I also like Timothy Zahn in general. I like the Honor Harrington series, if you happen to know what that is. Some of Salvatore's work I like, over in Faerun and whatever else he does. I like Peter David sometimes, based on some of his things. And this is going to sound weird, but I tend to like movies based on... books based on movies I like. Because oftentimes the book will allow you to elaborate, will allow you to go into further detail and depth than the movie did, and so you can really enjoy the plot of it. Van Helsing, the most recent one, is a great example. The Van Helsing movie, which I did enjoy, by the way, was the way the book was done was so different. You really went into the thought process and the motivations of the Dracula character. The whole thing it was much better done. So, anyways, I'm going to quote this one directly here. I was just curious about your opinion on the active time battle bars in RPGs of the ilk of earlier Final Fantasies. Did you prefer the heavily turn-based aspect of the game, or are you a fan of many games of the genre seem to be based on the fighting aspect of their gameplay, which is faster and more streamlined? That's a difficult question to answer. In general, for example, we could use the ultimate example of turn-based combat would actually be Final Fantasy X, in my opinion, which is pure turn-based. As soon as you get your turn, you could put the controller down, walk away, make a sandwich, do whatever. Nothing happens until you come back. There are several other examples of this as well, but probably my personal favorite example of the active time battle in action, when time doesn't stop for you, is Final Fantasy VI. And that's partially because I understand some of the code that goes on behind there, but let's just move on. So, which one do I think is better? That's actually kind of a tough call. I personally prefer the actual active time battle of, say, FF6, and some of the older games. FF4 did that, Chrono Trigger did that, But there's nothing I have against turn-based. In fact, the entire Dragon Quest series... I didn't mention Dragon Quest, my goodness. That's also on my favorite somewhat of the Dragon Quests. Probably 7 if I had to pick one. Fantastic games. Those are very heavily turn-based, but it doesn't bug me much. So I guess it really depends on how well it's pulled off. I think personally, if you're sitting there and you really have to make the choice between is turn-based, if you're making a game and you really have to decide is turn-based what I want or is active time what I want, and that's like the deciding factor. At that point, go ahead and just do turn-based, because if nothing else, that will be easier to code, and you can spend more time on things that actually matter. Turn-based does not detract from a game as long as you do it well, is what I'm getting down to. This is 2 questions. I'm starting to wear my jaw out a little. That I'm gonna ask both questions, and I'm gonna get my answer out here. Do you have an opinion on how the industry can solve the used game sales problem? Because right now everyone's solution is multiplayer with a single-use key, BioWare, and that is basically terrible. Would you change price models, DLCs, etc.? The next question is, what do you think will be the future of gaming and where it is going? Now, let me state that this is by no means a simple issue, and I do actually sympathize a great deal, not just with the developers, but with the publishers here. Let me lay out the situation really quickly for you. If we start the era of video gaming at the NES, yes, I know there are video games before that. No, I don't care. NES is what brought video games into a culture rather than a subculture, in my opinion. So, and I could discuss that, but I'm not going to. If we start the era of video gaming at the NES, all the way up till now, the overall expectation of people who spend their money on the games, of the video games, has not really gone down over this whole time. It can be argued, successfully I would think, that it has gone down a little bit, that as the market expands, the overall acceptance of subpar games or terrible games has gone up. But for the most part, the expectation remains the same, that the game should be good. That's important because the price of making a game has done nothing but gone up as the years have gone on. And one of the reasons that the indie game market and the retro game market have both such a resurgence in recent years is because so many people have realized what I've been saying for the last decade. Video games are just more and more expensive to make, and somewhere along the line you have to start sacrificing quality because you just start running out of money. That's just the reality of the life. That's the situation. You want to make a fantastic, brand new, amazing game, you're going to have to cut corners. The end. And the only companies that manage to get away from that are ones that either have the money to burn because they do all their work themselves and have, like Bethesda or Nintendo or Blizzard, I hate to use them as an example, or have some other method of getting around it, like, let's go ahead and use Ubisoft, and not actually Ubisoft, I forget who actually makes the Assassin's Creed series, but whoever they are, who have just basically been using the same engine this whole time, and polishing the engine slightly, polishing the textures and the models, but it's the same engine, so they don't have to go back and code a new engine every single time, which chops a huge amount of development time and budget out of it, and lets them actually work more on the content, if you follow me. So that problem means that unless you have an ability to either just eat the budget or you have the ability to cut corners, it gets much more difficult in order to actually make a game in the modern era. And it's only going to get more difficult because that's going to stay true. The expectation is going to stay about here, maybe dipping down just a little bit. And the price is going to kind of go like this. And so now there's two. Now let me stick back to the first question. Okay, what do you think about the used sales problem? I have very strong personal opinions about the used game problem. I think that the companies who are wigging out about the used game problem are stupid, to put it completely and utterly frankly. I think that they are forgetting to understand that while they... How do I put this? If someone was not going to buy their game new, but instead chose to buy it used, there is a very good chance that person wasn't going to buy it new anyways. What I mean by that is a sale they never had. People keep going on, the marketing representative, the publishers keep going on about all these sales they're losing. You're not losing anything. Your sales have not gone up or down. They have stayed the same because that used game was still purchased by someone who was going to buy it and who may or may not have returned it for whatever reason they choose to. And their desire to keep making money off of the used copies is, frankly, greedy. Now, I will go back a step here and give them an allowance for that because, as I've said, video games are just getting more and more expensive to make. And so the reason you see that problem now, whereas you didn't see that problem 20 years ago, is because 20 years ago, those used games that were floating around didn't bother anybody. They didn't need to squeeze every penny out of their sales. They made enough money to recompense their losses. Nowadays, they really have to be thinking, they really have to be working in order to make sure that their game is profitable in ways that they didn't have to used to be. So I am kind of with them on it. But that's not the way to go about it. My personal opinion is the proper DLC route, which is what Bethesda does. When Bethesda releases a DLC, that is a real DLC. That's actual content. That's plenty of stuff to do. It's new. It's interesting, and it also is something that sits on the existing engine. So the amount of time that goes into making that is considerably less, and the amount of money, this is important, goes into that is considerably less than it did to make the game to begin with. And so that is a much easier and much more acceptable, in my opinion, way to recompense losses from a game. Fallout 3 is a great example of that. Every single DLC that came out for Fallout 3 was fantastic. I bought all of them, by the way, every single one of them, and I enjoyed every single one of them. It was great. Oblivion, other example. They were still calling it expansions back in Oblivion and in Morrowind, but point remaining. And so I'm with that. I do not like the idea of trying to do the single key thing. That's going in a direction I don't like, and that's setting a precedent I don't like. That could set all sorts of bad mojo for the future. Let's just put it that way. But speaking of the future, let's go ahead and talk about... Excuse me, air. Let's talk about the other half of the question, which was, where do I think gaming will be going? Now, we have really two options here, and it's possible both will happen in their own ways, if you follow me. One, this problem will just get worse and worse and worse. And so the amount of companies and the amount of people who will be able to put out the truly good games will just shrink and shrink and shrink until they're the only ones who will be making any real money on gaming, and everyone else will be making iPhone apps. This is a bit of an exaggeration for the sake of effect, but we're talking like another decade here. Because an iPhone app or a indie app is something that takes 5 minutes to develop. I'm being unkind. It does not take a lot of money to put into that, to make that kind of a Flash game. It really doesn't. I'm sorry. Angry Birds did not take 152 developers and 3 years to make. It didn't. That's just how it is. So we'll either see the split will become greater, so we'll have all the iPhone devs, and there will be have like 5 people making good games, or what we'll start to see happening is the resurgence in the indie market and the retro market will continue, and so we'll see people saying, well, why don't we dig up the old engine for blah, polish it a little bit with high def textures and stuff, and then make a game based off of that. And that will work, in my opinion, as long as because that will enable them to cut costs in a big way, in a way that won't really be noticeable to the content. Thus, they can put all the rest of the time in the budget into the content, into actually making a good game, if you follow me. And so, in other words, what I'm saying is gaming is either going to get much, much better or much, much worse. Take your pick. And it is also possible for both to happen. It kind of depends. We'll see. I really hope it's the latter, but whatever. Moving on. 2 more questions, then I'm almost done here. What is my opinion on the prequel trilogy of Star Wars and George Lucas in general? Now, George Lucas is out of his mind. That's all I'm saying on that man. But, what I will say about the Star Wars prequels, I am one of those truly rare people who sort of defends them, and I gotta say sort of there. There were obviously some mistakes in Episode 1, and honestly, if you did 3 little edits to Episode 1, it would completely change that movie to be so much better. I can tell you what those edits are right now. Remove or reduce... how do I put this? Either remove or change Jar Jar Binks. Everyone's expecting that one. But in all honesty, that type of character is something you did not have to remove, necessarily. If you did it properly, if you didn't do it to be... if you didn't do it to be comic relief, you didn't do it to be the child aspect, whatever, then Jar Jar Binks would not have been a necessarily bad thing. Get rid of the accent, maybe. Even the accent could stay, as long as they did the character properly. I've discussed this with some of my friends. I'm not going to bore anyone here with those thoughts. Second thing, age Anakin. And I mean this. Put Anakin about 10 years older than he actually is. Maybe 8, maybe something like that, but definitely played by someone who is in his mid to late teens. Completely eject all of the childish aspects of his experience. Really have him at that point in his life where he is just confused and lost, and he doesn't know what to think about anything, and the Force is just now starting to really manifest within him, and he's also at that point in time dealing with hormones and dealing with being a slave on Tatooine, of all places. That could have added so much to the movie and taken away all of the childish aspects, which, in my opinion, were completely unnecessary. Excuse me. The third thing is get rid of all the damn CGI. Now, I've gone on record, not here, saying that I think CGI in moderation is a good thing. The original Star Wars trilogy, when it was redone up with some CGI, I think that was just towing over and back on the line. Some of the scenes, where they redid the space battles with the CGI, completely with it. I had no problems with that at all. It was nice seeing the ships actually move around. You can actually see the whole fleet in the background. You can actually see the full length of the Death Star. I'm with that. Redoing, adding something that is obviously fake-looking, wandering across the camera on Tatooine and having the extra guys in the background, that's just one little toe over the line, I think. That was still acceptable. That still didn't bother me. But that was pretty much the line right there. What they did in the prequels was leapt over that line as far as they could, and I'll never forget this. I was watching an interview with Ewan McGregor, who plays Obi-Wan in the prequels, and I want you to picture this, if you will. He's sitting here on a green plank, and this plank is just a plank. There's nothing automated, there's nothing animatronic. It's just a green plank with green paint on it, and there's a green background in all directions, and he's just sitting there, and he's supposed to be pretending that he's riding an animal. Kind of like this. I don't know if I'm doing this right or not, but he is supposed to be providing all of the motion, all of the movement for the scene, and everything else in the scene was supposed to be CGI. That is too much. CGI should be used as a tool, not a crutch, in my opinion. And if they'd toned back the CGI, I've always been someone who's believed that the value of a real model, of a real puppet, of a real, active thing that you can interact with, works better than a CGI. Farscape, a fantastic example. The Jim Henson puppets. Calling them puppets is almost an insult for how complicated and how expensive these animatronics were. Pilot and Rigel and everything, actually, everything in that show. It just adds something to see something that you can tell. Your eyes are telling you that's real, because it is real. It actually is a physical object that's right there. And it just adds something to it, in my personal opinion, over having a CGI-ness over here, and the guy's just kind of watching in this direction. And the director said, okay, you see that dot on the wall? That's roughly where his head is. Okay. it changes it a bit, I think, and that's my opinion about the prequels. I will still defend them. I still did enjoy them. I still do enjoy them, but they pale utterly and completely in comparison to the original trilogy, and I think those three things. That's episode one, admittedly, just episode one. But the CGI thing alone, if you'd chopped that out of two, and add Grievous to two, and then chopped that out of three, I think we would have had much better movies. But that's just my opinion. Final question, most recent one I got. This was just today. What do you think of the Banner Saga video game and their Kickstarter fundraising? Fundraising. God, my tongue's giving out on me. I haven't actually been watching the Banner Saga very closely, but I'm aware of what they've been doing. I'm completely with them on it. Bravo, for lack of a better way to put it. I am very pleased that they actually managed to do something. I love the Kickstarter concept. I do. I really wish I had the kind of money to fling at Kickstarter projects that I just want to support, because I love that idea. I love the idea that people are saying, well, okay, if we go to a publisher, we will get screwed 15 ways sideways, so we'd like to make this game. Here's our concept art. Here's our ideas. Does anyone want this game? And then people say, yes, make the game. I love that idea. That this also ties into what I was talking about earlier about the future of video gaming. It is also very possible that people will go what is essentially the Minecraft route. People bought Minecraft so that money could be turned back into the game. Now, that's not... There's a lot of complications there and details and drama. I'm not going to go into it, but that idea of here's what I want to do with this game, and would you please give me money? You don't have to pay for it; it's free. But if you will pay me for, then I will continue making the game. And that people are like, yes, here, have money. I love that concept. I want to see more of that. I really do. And bravo on them for doing that. And I'm finally out of all my questions. And. I'm sorry, there's actually one other question. I technically answered this before, but I've received this question several more times, so I'm just going to get this all out here. I used to work in TV productions back in Topeka, Kansas, and one of the things I had was on the headsets we had little audio cues that were supposed to mean, this means the camera's on, this means the camera's off, this means we've just been interrupted, this means we just lost power, this means we're done for the take, all sorts of things like that. And we had this big old switch, which I can't emulate here, because we were using analog equipment, we were using cassette tapes and VHS tapes and actual editing equipment rather than the digital medium. And so there was this big old switch that would shut off the recording to whatever we had in the bays, and it would go and actually, but there we go. And every time that was the sound for "we are done." That's a wrap. That was the sound that everybody could relax and the people could go, oh, okay, and stop following the cameras. So I would just say whenever I was done. And when I started doing these reviews way back, I guess it hasn't been that long. Without even thinking about it, I was like, all right, camera's done, without even mentioning it. And I made an active point to stop doing that, and I started getting complaints from several of my friends, and especially my sister, who was like, where's the kacho? I wanted the kacho, and so I had to start making a point of doing it at the end of every video again. Because they wanted, whatever, I got nothing. But anyways, that's the end of my review, or my Q&A session. If you have any more questions, feel free to toss them. I'll go ahead and answer them. But I'm going to try and review, Fallout 3 is actually the next game I'm going to look at. Don't really have a timeline on that. I would like to get that done sometime this weekend. That is probably not going to happen until Monday, because I've got a lot of work to do this weekend. Regardless, thank you for listening. If you have any questions, have any other thoughts about how horrible and stupid I am, I think this is my longest video yet at this point. It's been a pleasure.